All right, great. Well, still see folks coming in, but I'll get started just so we don't take any time from our presenters who've done a ton of work, and really excited to share with them today. So welcome everybody to the roundtable Seed Sovereignty for Climate Change Resiliency with Bill Braun, Heron Breen, Petra Page-Mann, Amira Mitchell, and Luke Jeffries, who I will introduce in a little bit. Got a few, let's see, got a few housekeeping and important introductions to make first. So first of all, our commitment to, our commitment to racial equity at NoFMAS. We're working to deepen our commitment to racial equity and justice, including honest work, examining whiteness and dismantling systems of white supremacy that are part of many dominant systems, very much including our food systems. The foundation of modern organic agriculture is rooted in the longstanding cultural practices of BIPOC communities. And we acknowledge that the US is built on stolen land and that the food system was built on stolen labor of Black, Indigenous, Latina, Asian, and other people of color. For anybody who's not of an original steward of this land, we invite you to, or we ask that you do open up this interactive map. I think a link will be in the chat, and find the area that you farm and live, who the original stewards of that land are. And I hope folks enjoyed the BIPOC caucus this morning. There is a Spanish speaker lounge after this, directly after this session, which information is there. And for white allies and co-conspirators, here's some way to essential racial equity in your own work and support BIPOC communities. There will be some links in the chat, and you can share resources, including land, money, and tools with BIPOC organizations, such as the Urban Farming Institute, Garden the Community, the African Alliance, the Native American Rights Fund, Indigenous Peoples Network, and Pocasset Pokanoket Land Trust. Support legislation that will begin the talk and advance the work towards reparations and protect the rights of farm and food workers. I think if you take a look in the chat right now, you'll find some links as well. All right, and some session etiquette and info. This account is set to mute participants on entry. And so to speak, just press the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen. Please do mute yourself when you come in and when you're done speaking to avoid background noise interfering with other speakers, and hosts can do this for you if needed. Feel free to use the chat feature to comment at any point during the workshop. The hosts will check the chat periodically during the session, and presenters will leave time at the end to address questions. And please do note that the session is being recorded. So I want to introduce you to our gold sponsors in this slide. We are really appreciative of the ability to provide the space for this community, and we really appreciate their work in enabling that. These are another few of our sponsors. So wanted to thank them. The online auction, I think you'll see the link there in the chat. A lot of great items, and we really appreciate folks who have donated to us to provide these to you to bid on. So if you're in a position to do so, please do check that link out. Not entirely sure when it closes, and somebody might be able to put that in the chat, but it's definitely, you know, this is the last session aside from the Spanish Lounge of the weekend. So get on over there. And we also thank our virtual vendors. You can visit their listings online for special discount codes and their presentations in the fancy interactive program book on the internet that you all got here through. All right, so I'm gonna go out of screen sharing. And I am going to introduce our presenters and then turn it over to our executive director for just a moment, and then we'll launch into the roundtable. Bill Braun farms with his partner Deanna at Ivory Silo Farm in Westport, an organic, diversified farm growing vegetables, herbs, flowers, fruit, and seeds. Farm's original design was to serve as a living lab for seed work, slipping through the cracks of the commercial seed trade, and it's since graduated into Freed Seed Federation, a farmer-run nonprofit dedicated to place-based seeds for people and communities. There should be links for Farm and Freed Seed Federation in the chat. Heron Breen was born and lives in the rural central Maine town of St. Albans. Lessons and advice from wise community members have built his practice of seed work in fields throughout the Sebasticook and Kennebec Rivers watershed, Wabanaki lands. Farming seed and plant breeding for 17 years, Heron is also an ongoing 22-year career in the retail seed trade. Amira Mitchell is a farmer, seed keeper, and community educator. She holds a BS in horticulture from Temple University and has worked in ag since 2007. She's worked on urban farms in Massachusetts, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, including 4 years at True Love Seeds, Pennsylvania-based farm and seed company. Currently, Amira is working to start her own seed business, Sister Seeds, growing heirloom seeds from across the African diaspora, and you should find links in the chat for those as well. Luke Jeffries is a Mohawk from Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. He's a language learner, avid gardener, and project coordinator for a group whose name I should have asked him ahead of time to pronounce, but Ratin Heyanthos, I hope that's close to correct, to operate the seed sanctuary in Tyendinaga. They've rematriated a seed collection in the last few years and have been working to ensure that the living collection remains viable for future generations. And last, there's the live transcription if you need it. And if that just popped up below and you don't want the live transcription, you can also click that and get rid of it. So last, Petra Pageman is a believer in each seed and each of us in the world, that each of us is in the world to change the world. In 2012, she founded Fruition Seeds to share the seeds, knowledge, and inspiration gardeners need to be more successful in the Northeast, as well as to build a culture of curiosity and care centering seeds of both resilience and justice. If she's not farming, she's singing, skiing, snuggling her dogs, hunting mushrooms, or sharing a feast with a friend. And before I turn it over to the roundtable, I'd like to welcome Jocelyn Langer, our executive director at NOFA Mass, to introduce herself and the collaboration that was the impetus behind the roundtable.
Great, thanks, David. Yeah, I just want to give a little bit of background here because this is part of a bigger conversation. I spoke with a number of people here from the 7 NOFA chapters several months ago to discuss collaborating for an on-farm seed trialing network across the Northeast. We met with Heron Breen and sort of started the conversation. We're in the process of developing that. And we began with the goal of involving farmers from across the region to implement seed trials on their farms and share outcomes in a common database. So that was sort of where we left off. And I'm glad to see that there are a number of folks from that initial conversation and from the other states right now, because I think the conversation is going to evolve as we sit here. You know, initially we saw the need for this regional seed trialing partnership as a response to issues around the climate crisis. And as the conversation has evolved, even just over the past week, it's also become clear that seed sovereignty is a crucial piece of that conversation. And I think we're taking a little bit more of a holistic look at the interconnectedness of culture, climate, and collaborative resilience here. So in any case, I think our first step is to come together, begin talking with our members in our community to build some momentum on this topic. The NOFA Mass Winter Conference is the first of all NOFA conferences, so we get to sort of kick off this conversation, but there are going to be a number of related conversations happening at other NOFA conferences across the region over the next few months. I wish I had all of that information in one place for you, but I'll put my email in the chat, and if you're interested in kind of an overview of seed saving and seed sovereignty related conversations at other NOFA conferences, I can maybe send out an email, you know, as I collect that within the next couple of weeks. I know New York has the next conference coming up. So here's my email, and I'd like to turn things over to Bill Braun. Thank you.
Thanks, Jocelyn and David. Thanks to NOFA for the opportunity, and good afternoon to friends old and new, and welcome. Honored to moderate this conversation today between some extraordinary humans working with and caring for seed, land, and communities. Just to begin by reiterating the obvious, we can't have a grounded and meaningful conversation about seed sovereignty out of the context of land access, systemic racism, and colonialism. There have been a number of conversations digging into these very issues throughout the conference, and we're grateful to NOFA for that. These conversations are absolutely indispensable to seed work and will be threaded throughout our panel discussion today. However, as we are limited in time, we'll limit attempts to tackle these broader issues generally within this discussion for the sake of the discussion itself. We invite you to open your hearts and your minds. Recognize that though we convene together today under the theme of strategies of resilience amidst the climate crisis, we're coming at it from very different perspectives at times. May we all value these differences, learn from one another, and recognize critiques as systemic rather than individual or personal. Recognize we will not figure this out in an hour and a half or in one conference. Recognize also that though this conversation today is a continuation, it's also a beginning. Let us not fear discomfort. Let us go there as a path to understanding and to solidarity. In this spirit, we wanted to take a moment to define two key terms to our discussion today so that we're all on the same page with what we mean when we say them. I'll also post these definitions in the chat. Colonialism, concerning the acts and effects of all forms of state-sanctioned domination of other peoples and other lands through acts of violence, coercion, displacement, dispossession, subjugation, exploitation, resource extraction, and eradication, historically through present day. Also referring to the mindsets and structures that allow for such violence to continue upon land and people. Particularly for the North American context, settler colonialism refers to how European settlers forcibly removed and eliminated indigenous peoples to make way for them and us. Seed sovereignty, generally. A community's ability to control, protect, and care for its own seeds. It's of note here that the panel description suggests a conflation of seed saving and seed sovereignty, which is all too common. The idea being that the act of seed saving equals taking back community control of seed. This presumption demands much more nuancing, and it's not consistent with seed sovereignty as defined within individual communities, and unfortunately, most often hinders or obscures particular challenges with regard to those communities. It's critical to emphasize that these two ideas, seed saving and seed sovereignty, are not interchangeable. And though the former is necessary for the latter, it is no guarantee of it. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our panel. We've collectively framed the conversation today around the question of what seed sovereignty means to each of us. Each panelist will spend some time unpacking that question, and then we'll take some time for the panelists to respond to one another as a sort of wrap up, leaving as much room as possible for general questions at the end. Amira, would you please start us off?
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So for me, and I am a Black African-American person, and for me, seed sovereignty is about our people's right to reclaim our relationship to our seeds, which means reclaiming the actual seeds that were extracted from our communities during the processes, the continuing processes of colonialism and racial capitalism. It means reclaiming the practice of saving our seeds and our ancestral seedways, reducing our reliance on the same PUC corporations, and building up our community interreliance. It means reclaiming our cultural narratives, our stories, legends, songs, mythos, and diverse ways of understanding our relationship to our cultural seeds. And this is so important, I think, especially for Black folks in the Americas, where our histories have been erased, where our connections to our seeds have been erased in order to uplift a Eurocentric narrative around food and around culture. And it also, seed sovereignty means reclaiming the resources that were gained through the economic exploitation of our cultural seeds. So this is what it means to me. And I want to really emphasize that seed sovereignty is not fully possible without land sovereignty. The land and the seeds are tied. Seeds cannot live in a basement in some jars. They must live in the soil and through their descendants, just as we must. We are living beings, both of us. And land loss, whether it's through forced displacement, voluntary migration, climate change and environmental degradation, whatever the cause, is a a huge contributing factor to the loss of seeds from our community and to the loss of our communities themselves. So I want us to keep in mind when we're talking about seed sovereignty, that seed and land sovereignty are tied, and together they form the basis of sustainable and resilient communities. And for our communities to survive climate change, that is exactly what they need to be: sustainable and resilient. So for me, in my agricultural practice, I look to the examples of my ancestors, who were not strangers to the concept of having to survive in a radically different climate than the one that they originated from. We're no strangers to the story. We all know that the story of African-American people begins on the continent of Africa with many different ethnic groups and cultures, predominantly within West Africa. And it begins with thousands and thousands of years of agricultural innovation and connection between people and land and seeds. And then we know that as part of this history of my ancestors, the Middle Passage and the forced displacement of my ancestors brought them from their lands to the Americas. And there are many stories throughout the diaspora of women knowing that they would be captured, braiding the seeds into their hair, braiding the seeds into the hair of their children and of their children's children, knowing that wherever they ended up in the entire world, and they had no idea, but wherever they ended up, they knew that they'd need to eat. They knew that they would need to grow food, and they knew that all of this begins with the seed. And so they carried those seeds with them. And that tradition is one that has been passed down throughout the diaspora and remains part of our history. The displacement of Black peoples from land did not end with the Middle Passage, however. It continued over and over and over again as my ancestors, and I can trace them back. I have been doing some genealogy research, and I can trace them back as they were traded from plantation to plantation. And as I have immersed myself in my seed keeping practice, I can also trace those seeds that they made sure that they carried with them from place to place along that journey, wherever they happened to go. And then, even after the end of slavery, that forced displacement continues. In 1910, African Americans owned over 15 million acres, is that right? Yeah, 15 million acres of farmland, which due to anti-Black terrorism, economic violence, governmental oppression has been significantly reduced. And my own family is part of that forced migration off of land as a result of all of these things. And with that land loss comes the loss of seeds, the loss of our transgenerational seed keeping traditions and a lot of those cultural seeds. But with that also, I take a lesson from my ancestors that every time when we are forced from our homes and our land, we bring our seeds with us. And wherever we arrive, when we arrive in that strange land with a strange new climate, we grow those seeds, and those seeds connect us back to where we are from. And they also carry us into the future, adapting with us to the new land. And those seeds that survive and have become part of the African-American heritage seed group, these are the seeds that have adapted with us to the different climates, to the different lands. And I know that no matter how many times we are forced to migrate again, forced to evacuate, as many Black communities on the coast have had to evacuate due to climate change, as long as we carry these seeds with us, they help our communities survive and remain strong. But in order for us to have true community seed sovereignty, the seeds must return to the land. in my family, both sides of my family, I come from long generations of farmers. But I am the first returner to farming in my family for multiple generations, for 3 and 2 generations respectively. And the reason for that is because of the trauma of slavery, and that mark that it's left upon the psyche of our family meant that going back to the land was very painful. And our family did not initially realize that the impact that would have on our participation in our community and in our culture when we left that farmland. One of my grandmothers told me when she left Southern Georgia, where she used to pick cotton as a child, she never dreamed of going back. She went north, she migrated, along with many others who were forced to, or who desired to, because of that painful history. On my other side, my family in North Carolina, they didn't go north, but they did leave the land. It's only been as I've returned to farming, as I've started to take up agriculture and involve ancestral research in my practice of farming and in my practice of seed keeping, that I have returned to my family some of the seeds that have been lost. And the first seed that I was able to do this for was called the green striped cushaw squash, which is a squash that I read about just in Michael Twitty's blog about a seed that had been grown in North Carolina for a really long time, where that side of my family is from. And I grew it out and saved the seeds. And then that very fall, after I had harvested those seeds, my grandmother passed away. And she was the keeper of the cuisine, of the food, of all of that in our family. So when we went to celebrate her life after her passing, and we started talking about food, I learned for the very first time in my life, and I'm now, an adult, and hearing for the very first time about my great-grandfather's garden and about the green striped cushaw squash that he grew, that I was growing with no knowledge of that connection. And so that following Thanksgiving, which is when my family has always come once a year to be with each other, I made pies from that squash. And it was the first time in generations that anyone from my family had ever eaten that squash. And it brought tears to the eyes of my great aunt Maddie. I don't know if she likes when I tell that story, that part of the story, but it did. And she charged me with always bringing the pie, which means always keeping that seed, always growing it. And my intention is to take it a step even further, because I want all Black people to have access to our seeds. And I want all Black people to have access to land in which those seeds can live, and to live in resilient communities that can keep those seeds alive. And so with that intention, I am right now, I'm in the process of starting a small seed farm, just with the intention of trying to identify some of those lost varieties, right? Or some of those varieties that are in someone's grandma's backyard and that need desperately to be preserved. Those varieties that have traveled from land to land to land, from state to state, across continents and oceans, and have carried with them that entire story and all of that, the information, that knowledge with them. So I want to be able to identify these seeds, to grow them, to offer them back to other farmers like me. So that's the intention that I have for what I'm doing next. And so I share that story to say simply that sometimes it can be bleak to think about climate change, to think about the change that we know is coming, about the losses that we anticipate with the loss of land, the loss of climate, the loss of our communities. And I think there is great tragedy in this change that we know is coming, but there's also hope in the stories of my ancestors and yours, and how they've been able to adapt time and time again in the face of these struggles. And it's something that I carry with me in my farming practice, is to keep these seeds alive, to keep growing them in the soil. It isn't fully seed sovereignty, but it is a first step. So.
Thank you, Amira. Luke, would you please?
De gunorados, Leosana que ni waxanodo, danawaganato, Contegen hit the Pagano. And only de gunorados, Amira, Nyongo, G, I, what a winagotne, what a wanna winagotne, G, easy. So, Segel, my name is Luke. De Hosandige is my Mohawk name. I am from Tainanega, Tro Clan. Thank you, Amira, for that story. It is very powerful, and it rings very closely, and we'll see some similar themes here as I get talking. But it's very similar experiences between Indigenous people and Black people in North America in terms of dispossession and in terms of the loss of our personal sovereignty and our personal self-determinations, as well as the breakup of our communities over and through history. Yeah, so thanks for that. As I said, or as I said in the introduction, I'm Benugahaga, I'm Tainanega, and our traditional territory is on the Mohawk River in New York State. So the history, so I'll start there with a bit of a history to get to where I think is seed sovereignty. So the history of my nation is deeply intertwined, some of you may know, with the histories of Canada and the United States. My nation had a strategic alliance with our foreign neighbors, which is still sort of together today. It has survived 200 years of warfare, another 200 years of colonization after that. And we are collectively called the Haudenosaunee, people of the Longhouse. So our food system allows us, or our historical food system, the Three Sisters, everybody's heard of that, but it's much more complicated, obviously, allowed us to store vast quantities of food. It was a regular practice that we would store up to 70 years worth of corn to get through hard times. So you can imagine that much corn being stored in a silo or something like, over a series of silos. It's quite a lot. So things change, of course, as history progresses and as more settlers come. Disease and near continual war greatly weakens Indigenous nations, in particular mine, during this colonial period. And we are dispossessed slowly of our core territories. So as I said, the Mohawk Nation comes from Upper New York State on the river there, but we are now mostly residing in Canada on the other side, and that is purely by dint of being allied to the British at the time. So in some places, there were vast fields surrounding villages, kind of like radiating outward, and there were many orchards of both like European and native varieties that that we cultivated around. 7 years of corn. That's how many. Sorry, I just popped up there. What was I talking about? Yes, and they had to be abandoned through the course of all of these wars and through all of these dispossessions, these land dispossessions. So we're now having to bring our agricultural practices to lands which aren't traditionally like the core territories, but it's on the periphery of where our people would have existed. And then through, as I said, the 1800s or so, our movements were much more constricted and our land bases became much more constricted. So we were put on reserves by that point, and we were not allowed to go off those reserves, which forces us into a situation of dependency with the powers that be, in this case, governments of Canada. And for our sister nations on the American side, it'd be government of the United States. So you'll see this pattern of land dispossession, and Amira talked about it very well in her presentation, that there is a pattern of dispossession where settlers, and in particular white settlers, are pushing people off of land to gain access to that land for themselves. And by putting people onto reserves and preventing them from going anywhere, you're taking away their livelihoods because they're not able to move and work on the land. And you're forcing them into a situation where they have to depend upon you as a person in power for supplies, food, and so on and so forth. So without access to land, indigenous nations will not be able to thrive. So then this is how I see seed sovereignty. Seed sovereignty is a facet within a greater food sovereignty, within a greater sovereignty writ large, as a sort of national sovereignty, as it's been taken away and denied to my people through time. So food sovereignty, then, I'm sure you all know, but I'll quickly look at this concept, is the ability of the community to produce, allocate, and prosper from a food source within its own control. This idea takes in more of a whole system of growing food for both human and animal, distribution of food, transportation, land rights, access to water, and of course seeds. So this is part of a food system. Seeds are essential to the annual regeneration of that food system. So seed sovereignty, simply to me, is the right and ability to grow, keep, and breed your own seeds without depending upon another for supply. And when you see this in an indigenous context, and in particular with my Ganyankehaga peoples, we see this extend to multiple communities. And they become a nation at that point. So yeah, that's basically what I see it as. Is the challenges that we encounter to achieving sovereignty are wrapped up in the land question over who owns it, who has access to it, and who can draw resources, let's say, from it. So that's one thing, lack of land base that prevents us from doing that. Now, this doesn't only apply to my nation, it applies to every indigenous nation, and it applies to Black people as well, as Amir said. So in the course of history, indigenous people by and large have been pushed to the marginal areas that aren't as great for growing things or aren't as great for surviving on things. Deno Oni, they would have been perhaps put down in their winter camp, let's say, because like indigenous people, they move around within their territories. There's a place for summer, there's a place for winter, there's a place for fall, and you don't always stay in the one place. Just as an example, Kasheshawan, which is up on James Bay, that's their summer camp. There's no way that anyone would stay there in winter because the weather is terrible. It's not protected. There's nothing there to eat or anything like that. That's just a summer location. So that's just a quick example. There's contaminated lands from extractive and heavy industries. There's lots of mining out there that you don't see. And Canada is very, very large. And to miss a mine could just as easily be like a hedge that you just can't see to the other side, sort of thing. And things are so well hidden sometimes in very remote areas. And then on top of that, there are remote communities. My community exists on the shores of Lake Ontario. There's lots of infrastructure. There's lots of things around to do and to access that other nations in Northern Ontario and the rest of Canada don't have access to. And that means essentially a lack of infrastructure. So things like water, things like, greenhouses just for the ideas of growing things, but even housing becomes a problem in a lot of indigenous communities. But that always comes back to land dispossession, that always comes back to enforced poverty. So further to that, we have some colonized mentalities. If you think about a situation where you're always forced to depend upon someone, and if that becomes a generational situation, then the default mentality is to depend on the person who is in power and holding power over you, no less. So a lot of this results in indigenous communities as waiting for the white man to say it's a right to do something, which makes no sense. However, that is the situation that colonized mentalities creates. it is kind of like a Stockholm syndrome. Let's say, like, it's not exactly that, but it's like that situation where you've been hurt so much that you see them as your savior, sort of thing. So on that note then, so through centuries of pain and loss and degradation of culture, there's such things as intergenerational trauma, which had been visited on us from the outside because of these disruptions, now becomes a self-perpetuating self-colonization or intergenerational trauma of the self and of our own families. And this is really difficult to actually escape. This is by far the hardest part about existing as an Indigenous person, is escaping the pain and the trauma of that, and to be able to see something better for yourself. Anyway, that's a very, very, very long topic that we can get in on if we want, but I don't think that's, strictly speaking, relevant to what our talk is today. But and then finally, residential schools. I think you called them boarding schools in the States. Anyway, same idea. You take the children away and you cut them off from their family. You give them a whole new set of values to learn and act upon and speak about in the language of, it was English in many cases, and taking away their other language. So that also served to cut the connection from children, a new generation of children, to the land and to their families and to the practices of agriculture and other land-based activities. So that was designed as to cut the cord. And then the final problem, which is always ongoing, there is never any break whatsoever, is racist colonizer governance. This is, broadly speaking, an assimilationist policy. And no matter how they dress it up, it is the same. It is always designed to be the same end result, which is removal of the Indian problem, and to ensure that the land is completely within that state's control so that they can have economic certainty. They can develop it the way they want without any problems. Now, in Canada, there's a more positive legal culture that Indigenous people have been able to engage in. However, the underlying sovereignty has not been challenged by Canada. They still assume that they own it all, and that our rights and title, which did pre-exist and according to their own law does pre-exist and supersede, they're completely ignoring their own court and their own court decisions as they carry out what's called the Comprehensive Land Claim Treaty or process and the BC Treaty process. Those are all designed to extinguish our rights and our access to land overall. Again, no matter what pretty words they use, it's going to be the same way. So there's that. Canada, and I don't think the same sort of mentality exists in the States, but Canada still thinks of itself as a colony. If you're to think about how Canada develops its own resources and acts as an economic power in the world, they're still thinking like they're a colony of Britain. So they take the resources out, they sell the raw resources to somebody else. That's essentially your resource colony. And the final aspect of that is the demonization of land reclamation and rights recognition movements. So a big thing that happened several years ago in the US, you have the Dakota Access Pipeline thing, the no-DAPL deal. Standing Rock, that occurred. That's what that is about. That's essentially what that is about. You see law enforcement, and then also with Black Lives Matter, same response. Police came out in force, the military came out in force to put down people organizing for rights recognition, essentially, and for land rights recognition. What we see on the opposite side of that, complete compliance by police forces and military forces to enforce injunctions and other I don't know, I guess injunctions on land. So essentially aiding resource extraction companies in their mission of extracting resources. So you see this all the time. This is going on right now in Canada and several different places in Indigenous communities. Okay, so those are all those challenges. Now, speaking specifically about my peoples and the Haudenosaunee lands, in my ideal, we'd all be able to feed ourselves. We're traditionally agriculturalists. It's something that we do. And there is seed keepers, I believe, in every community still. That has not been something that's been lost completely. And there is a growing food movement within each community doing something a little bit different here and there, but it is a growing movement. So we can look toward a time when we can be independent of this Western economic system, to be able to build ourselves up together. And I think we have a slight advantage in that we think of ourselves all as a single nation altogether. And something that also is helpful in this is that generally speaking, Haudenosaunee people refuse to be part of Canada, refuse to be part of the United States. So that's not part of our identity structure. To be in this melting pot, let's say, of that. So the active refusal to be absorbed continues to be a motivating factor in picking up farming again and picking up seed keeping again. I think that's all I had. Okay.
Thank you, Luke. Petra, if you would, please.
Luke, thank you. Amira, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all listening in after this moment. I'd love to share some thoughts and perspectives that are mine. They are unique from yours. They may have similarities. They will certainly be divergent as well. I'm so grateful to share them, and I look so forward to hearing our collective experiences of this water that we swim in as we find different ways to swim. And this food system, this seed system, it is dominated by Pancho wants in on the party. And Matthew was gently ushering him downstairs. Come on. Oh my goodness. What was I saying? We all have divergent experiences and want in on a party of learning and unlearning. Welcome, Pancho. So yes, this seed system, our food system, is dominated by business interest, by colonial capitalism. And it's increasing privatization, ownership of land, of seeds, of stories. And we're very much insulated, some of us, from this reality, while others of us are not. So to me, seed sovereignty has looked like very different things in my life. And there was the time I was just thinking of seeds as food, as life, as these warm, fuzzy, delicious beings, and didn't see them also as capacities able to be weaponized by systems of oppression. And it has been a huge learning curve, recognizing the tremendous complicity of myself in the seed system, especially as a person creating a seed company in a seed system. I can't fathom buying and selling people. I imagine a time when our children's children's children will say, can you imagine? She thought she could buy and sell seeds. And so it is a daily question that we sit with as we benefit daily from genocide, from exploitation, from stolen lands and stolen seed. What role do seed companies play in seed sovereignty? And is there a generative overlap? Like, is there any capacity for a business, no matter how well intended, for profit or not for profit? Is there a business in the architecture of colonial capitalism that can actually move us toward a more collectively equitable and imaginable future? Or is it all detrimental? I only have questions. Sorry to cut to the chase. I don't have answers. And I do really love and hear the words daily of Rowan White, Mohawk seed keeper, in my mind and in my heart. She says, 150 years ago, seed companies did not exist. And if we do our work well, in 150 years, they won't need to exist. And so for me, seed sovereignty lies in remembering and honoring the thousands of years that farmers, that seeds have been collectively cultivating each other, co-adapting, selectively breeding, and exchanging needs and joys and capacities across species and across continents. And it's remembering that these seeds not only embed this climate resilience in their genetic codes, but of traditions and of deep spirituality and of deep relationship. So for me personally, and as Fruition Seeds, as a seed company, seed sovereignty looks a lot like listening and a lot like learning. And a lot of that learning is simply unlearning, and a lot of stumbling and a lot of standing up again, to stumble more, to stand up more. It looks a lot like humble pie and a lot like love. Love of seeds, love of people, love of process. Knowing that if that work of imagining a time when seed companies don't exist, knowing that is well beyond my lifetime, my daily work is imagining what I might do nonetheless in my lifetime. So critically engaging and recognizing what is no longer serving me or my community and composting it. Seed sovereignty looks a lot like compost because, you know, there's crap or things everywhere in myself especially. And so having the courage to breathe oxygen into that compost and to turn actively that compost rather than turn away, so that we can all be generatively decomposing. And some of us decomposing, some of us just remembering and composing. I love imagining that pain that we all collectively feel as indigenous souls with imperial minds, as Rowan White also so beautifully says, remembering that we might make medicine from that pain. And sauerkraut. I'd like to lift up a few of the ways that Fruition is actively, and that I personally am actively imagining and reimagining and embedding ourselves in a landscape of sovereignty for all. And that looks a lot like sauerkraut for me. And here I would love to just shout out and share so much love for Owen Taylor, True Love Seeds, and the stories that he shares of just leaning into our ancestry, especially as white folks, and remembering that there was a time that our ancestors were earth-loving and, and generative of these kinds of cultures that we dream of. And so for me, very Polish, very Scandinavian, and very Scottish, just imagining just every year we have a 20-gallon crock of sauerkraut, and growing that cabbage for that crock and filling that crock. And like bring the salt shaker, not just a grain of salt, but leaning into these kinds of traditional foods and sharing these kinds of stories. Having the courage to know I'm not going to get it right, that I still am going to try and to stumble and to learn. That leaning into relationship with the land, with seeds, with the people around me, especially people I am accountable to, which is us all, and especially our Black and Indigenous and all people who have been marginalized. And this looks like, I love Heron, I can't wait to hear you speak, but earlier today when you said, we sell seeds, we care for seeds, and what is the difference? How do we orient ourselves as individuals and especially as people engaged in seed, financial, transactional business? What does that care actually look like? How can we ask better questions? And how can we be centering and amplifying and resourcing those voices so they can truly be in relationship with the seeds that are their family and our collective families? So connecting to larger seed movements and larger social movements, I'd like to lift up and shout out a growing culture, and specifically their Seed is Power Fund, actively funneling funds from the organizations, corporations, for those who have been benefiting from genocide, exploitation, from the sales of these stolen seeds on stolen land. How can they be resourced to then be reallocating these funds to be actively meeting people at the front lines on the ground, making seed sovereignty possible in their watersheds, seed sheds, and beyond? And that looks like building community, certainly within ourselves and our partnerships, and internally our Fruition family and our wider Fruition community. That looks like, how do we build a culture, not just of how's your broccoli growing, here's a few tips, but here's how heteropatriarchy and capitalist colonialism, how can we become fluid enough with these words so that they don't paralyze us as individuals or as a collective, but can rather catalyze us to being and meeting this moment, adapting along with our seeds as we have for so many thousands of years, and deepening our relationship with those ancestral foods, both individually, collectively, nourishing the wounds of living in this time of collective diaspora and disconnection, especially as our white community unpacks and dismantles our whiteness. This also looks like the courage to keep doing better and showing up for people in our seed sheds. For me, sending love from Haudenosaunee, Seneca, unceded lands, where I am learning to be in relationship that is authentic and not performative with people, inviting people to our land to grow foods and seeds that are meaningful for them, and finding ways to somehow laugh amid the constant barrage of paralysis knocking on the door, and just learning to lean into collaboration as the world's most renewable resource, and to humble myself in the presence of people I deeply care about and seeds I deeply care about, which includes all of you. Thank you for listening. I can't wait, Heron, to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Petra. Heron, if you'd like to finish us off on the question of seed sovereignty and what it means to you.
Sure. Thanks everybody for sticking with us, and thank you for my amazing co-presenters. Can everyone hear me? Good. Okay. First thing I'd like to say is circle back to, like, who are we? Who am I? I am a very proud son of a witch. My mom was is and was a midwife for decades, giving aid to women giving birth at home for hundreds and hundreds of babies. And I accompanied her as a baby and as a young child and into my junior high years along with birth. And one of the reasons that seed saving and seed work came to me is a way of serving that reproductive power as a man. I'm not in a role to be a midwife, but with seeds, I can help that process into people's hands and food. And so I found that same power in that same place, in that same role in my community, to help other folks, seek those seeds and learn how to give birth to those seeds in my community. And that's been a really wonderful journey with lots of elders helping me along the way, which has been like, I am, have been really thankful to be at the passing edge of so many older people who've been keeping seeds and been hoping that one such person may come along. I wish it was many such persons that would come along that they could hand their seeds to. But in many cases, it's very few people that they can hand their seeds to. Much to what Luke was saying, in every white colonial community, there was many seed keepers, and now there is none. When we hear Luke and Amira talk about food culture and seed culture, I want to lift up that our own culture as white people and European people in the Northeast, we have also erased our own food culture and seed culture in our rush to sprawl, to find comfort. Every town in New England had a farmers, gardeners that were stewarding and adapting seeds, extracted many times from indigenous communities, but they were stewards. Many of these varieties either no longer exist or are no longer in anyone's hands. These are micro-adapted varieties. And so these regional beans, whether it be from Lynn, Maine, or Lynn, Massachusetts, every one of these communities had a bean or corn or other crops that they were stewarding that were extracted from indigenous communities. And those micro adaptions, we often think of climate change in terms of like something that can resist everything. And the truth is that we are looking for things that work in little tiny places because every place is different. It's not about every place being the same. It's about every place being different. The soils, the temperatures, the nighttime temperatures, the daytime temperatures, all the things that make a particular environment in the Northeast is where these particular seeds were adapted to. Now, you may think that means that it makes them peculiar to extinction. The truth is that actually these amazing microclimate adapted seeds are often the ones that are most resilient under stress because they've seen hundreds of years of fluctuations in temperature. And so when we look for, quote, the answers, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but the answers to, quote, climate change, we often seek the seeds of indigenous and peasant communities because the genetic stories of those seeds and those crops are so deep. So there are people ranging the world and looking for those intact stories to be able to extract, again, the genetic answers to the problems we've created. So the stories here, like those intact stories, are the stories we seek, but as we seek them, we are destroying the cultures and the people that are keeping those stories and evolving them. So I want to both say so this rush to serve is oftentimes the end result is destroy. So we can seek this in our own reality. Just the other day, over the course of the summer, I should say, I was trialing some beans from a regional breeder, and they're brand new beans and have these various different disease resistances. Wonderful tasting, had some amazing performances. But in that same row of beans, the traditional variety Nor'easter, which is a pole bean derived from indigenous extraction, completely outperformed and outsurvived all those beans. Those beans melted down and were completely absorbed by Japanese beetles eating the heck out of them. Whereas the Nor'easter bean didn't blink an eye. And so we look afar, and oftentimes the answers to this are in our backyard, but we have to become those caretakers. We also look afar for these answers. We look for varieties that have stress tolerances. We look for varieties that have heat tolerances. And where we look for those, again, are in the indigenous and peasant communities who often are never given consent, nor financial gain, nor any kind of recognition, let alone just partnership in the development of varieties. And the question is even whether or not we should be able to take those just because it's good for us. Should we be able to take? The answer is no, in my opinion, as someone who works with seeds and with plants. If some community has a variety of plant that has some amazing stress and disease tolerance and they choose not to share it, that needs to be respected. End of story. Regardless whether it can, quote, save the world or not. Because those are based upon relationships. When somebody, we go back to the story of the Jacob's cattle bean being shared originally to the first actually was someone who was both white and indigenous, a child born to parents of both, a handful or a quote bag of beans entered into that family. That is a pact of I am giving you the efforts of our ancestors to feed you and your body. If you betray that pact, such as take that person's land and subjugate them, you're basically betraying the very sustenance in which you build your body. So communities are going to have very particular reasons and ways that they want to share the quote solutions to the problem of climate change that they did not create. So for an example, there's watermelons that have disease resistances that are being used in breeding disease-resistant watermelons. Those disease resistances have not been compensated back from the financial gain to the communities in Africa that were stewarding those watermelons or to those lands in which that seed is gathered. In our own community, the Canadian crookneck squash is the root of all of the good flavor and all of the butternut varieties ever bred. If one penny, let alone one quarter, let alone one dime from every packet of Waltham butternut or any other butternut seed was ever given in royalty to indigenous communities, they'd be billionaires. So we already in a position where we have taken. So we have to be very cognizant of what we are asking when we look at the problem that is, quote, impending upon us and everyone else. When we seek the solutions, whether it's a hybrid cabbage or whether it's, some new thing we need to breed or we think we need to breed, we need to start becoming aware and asking ourselves, where does this system come from? Is this system part of systematic oppression? Is that what we're doing? Is that what we're perpetuating? The answer for climate change cannot be more systematic oppression. And seeds, a lot of us don't understand that, in our culture today, we buy seeds. We don't have a seed culture as white people. We barely have a food culture as white people. We need to be very cognizant about what we are building for ourselves and for the strengths of everyone. But mainly, we need to be looking at ourselves. Luke touched it on a little bit, and Amira as well. But in terms of our personal work in this area, seeds are the fingerprints. They are the genetic, both stories of ancestry, stories of journey. There are stories. We have pride in these stories, and we should. The Northeast, if you look really deeply, you'll understand that the Northeast, not that long ago, was the center of onion breeding. There's a new number of Danvers onion, Southport red globe, Southport white globe onion, a number of onion varieties. Almost every farm had their own onion selection. There's Danvers carrot. There's a whole bunch of beets that people were breeding in our region. We were bringing these crops to our region and we were adapting them. And these are the very varieties that our region was the center of genetic, basically seed growing for many, many years, but also the center of farmers selecting on stolen land and stolen places, but bringing their own seed here and trying to work in wise ways. And you may think that those genetic varieties have passed away, but all of the seed companies that formed here, and folks have heard me say this before, but basically all these seed companies that formed in the Northeast, the local gold of all these wonderful adapted varieties that they were working on, from corn through all kinds of other crops, basically were snapped up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into mega companies. So we have all the companies like Asgrow and Robson Seeds and a number of other seeds that became absorbed into what we now know as Monsanto. And this is how these companies work. It's not just our region that they came and that they realized we had the good things. They go to every rural community in every region. They try to buy the gold, which is the genetics, the things you can't retrieve once they're in their vaults. We have seed savers and we have communities trying to maintain these things, but our answers are not in the seed catalogs. That's the thing. You know, people think that, oh, if we just, breed this, grow this hybrid squash that has this resistance to this disease. Well, where did that resistance come from? Who should be benefiting from that? Let's be asking ourselves questions as we solve this so we don't perpetuate. So that's part of when we decide, this conversation today. I think lots of folks might think I was here to talk about a grant particularly, but today I think like when we get into quote research that we can do together, the question is who is together and who does it benefit? And I think like I'd like to end on this, not end, but kind of like deepen this question of care in the definition of seed sovereignty, the ability to care about seeds. And I think this reality is, to me, we learn to care for our traditional plants and seeds. When we learn to care for traditional plants and seeds and foods, we learn to care, period. Our interaction with our food and growing of food equals our interaction with each other and our caring for each other. Seed and food that takes more care and daily experience and ceremony equals a society that is aware of each other and nature. Our modern organic agriculture that most of us participate in, that is on this meeting, with all of its deep flaws, touches on this root truth that growing your own food changes your whole experience of the world. So to me, food and in turn seed is the #1 evolutionary vehicle for our development as caring and wise humans. Is my opinion, and many folks in quote science, that it's the alkaloids from real food that actually evolved our minds and our hearts over centuries and lifetimes. This is in part because our gut and our body biome informs our brain and our nervous system development. Good information and wise plants educate and create good and wise caring people. So all real wise plant food is superfood, a weird wacky word reflective of the empty food most of us consume today. Real wise food creates the most caring, disease-resistant, wise individuals and community. And empty food is indicative of empty cultures and the empty promise of progress, which I think a lot of us are pretty much in agreement about. But instead, similar to what I was talking about going around the world, modernity tells us that the solutions to all this are biofortification, like a fort, another military perspective to fight things is the answer. Using genetic and molecular lab tricks, many are GMO, to make a crop that have every nutrient a human needs. So we can just eat corn or rice, just singularly corn, or just eat rice and survive. This is our modern solution to malnutrition and societal destruction. Breed superfood crops to feed masses, not individuals, their RDA, rather than allowing the return of societies to eat their natural superfoods from their diverse diets. So instead of learning the lessons of societal oppression structures, that induce diseases such as pellagra. If folks should look into this disease called pellagra, we are working to entrench a one crop, one diet model, a colonial empirical solution to the problems caused by colonizing an empire. So if you're wondering what's going on in the global seed world, in global genetic preservation, this is what big money and big corporations and big grants are putting their money towards. So if we're going to look towards a solution in our region, let's look for a solution that everybody is at the table for. And we ask hard questions about land and food and seed and each other and hold ourselves accountable. So that's my input for today. Thanks everybody for your patience.
Thank you, Heron. Thank you to all of our panelists. I have the easy job of being the moderator, and I think they've said most of what needs to be said, though there is more always. And if there's one thing that we can see that unifies us is that seeds are resilience, and that we need more Amiras, more Lukes, more Petras, more Herons, more of you caring for seeds as we envision what community-based seed looks like on a grand scale. We don't have to look far if we look back to see that we can do it again. I'd like to, in the time we have remaining, because we do have to end a little earlier than expected with some housekeeping notes, I believe. So I'd like to just take this time to give the panelists an opportunity to respond to one another based on what's been said. We can go in reverse order if you'd like, a couple minutes each.
Well, reverse order would be me starting. She just heard me again.
Continue on.
Continue. I'm just going to frame that these conversations continuing is what we are desiring and needing. And in next Saturday on the 22nd, in the NOFA New York Winter Conference, there's 2 free pre-register seed sessions, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, that I would love to have anyone from this conversation who wants to join and talk about their own seed work or discuss what it means to be and actually design what it means to be in seed community. Like, we need to be co-leaders as a community in this. I'd love to see folks' faces there. So thanks for listening to us today. And I know, please follow all of these folks that are speaking today, because they're really valuable friends and wise people.
Heron, I love imagining you as a young person attending hundreds of births. And I love imagining you to this day continuing to be present for so many births of so many different seeds and relationships across the Northeast, across the world. And Luke, what an extraordinary journey that you're inviting us on. Thank you for welcoming us. I love, love, love hearing you and Amira share, and I look so forward to just continuing the journey and learning and unlearning by your sides. And thank you. Thank you all for coming today and having the courage to keep asking good questions and hard questions and building this community of great care.
Yeah, I don't really have much to respond to. I think many of the things were already said by my colleagues here, but I would like to highlight a couple things that they did say as sort of themes overarching. Heron, you said that you grow your own food and that changed your perspective on life. I agree. That's something I've long thought, but had no confirmation with anyone else. So thank you all for confirming that for me. And I do believe, like, if you'll respect your food a lot more, obviously, if you pull it right from the earth, like there's that work element to it and everything. Petra, you said 2 very important things, that imagining and unlearning. Throughout this process, we have to imagine something different by unlearning the things that we have as our own personal biases, especially as living within the heart of the empire, right here where we are in North America, where these ideas are constantly bombarding us through all sorts of media. So yes, good. We need to do that, and then at the same time, we need to be accountable to each other. Watching like the the political games unfold on the news in Canada here, like looking at all sorts of stuff that goes on down your south of the line. Man, do you need some accountability? Do we all need some accountability in this case? Because if we don't have accountability to each other, then we can't possibly have community. There's no way. And then Amira, I don't have much to say. We share so much of the same story already, like in terms of just like the broad outlines of it, of dispossession and things like that. But reclamation of land, reclamation of the seed is really the thing that needs to be highlighted in both of our talks, I think. And within that, you can have reclamation of your families and of your communities by engaging with your culture. I know there was a question that I want to answer. Someone asked me about a bunch of varieties. I've been creating a list that we grew. So all sorts of squash, beans, and corn, as everybody knows, but berries, lots of berries were cultivated purposely. Tree nuts, husk cherries, tobacco, sunflower, sunchokes, wild onions, brown nuts, whole series of leafy greens, lamb's quarter, amaranth, etc. And even getting into spices, things like spice bush or wood ash used as salt. Anyway, that's all.
I have many closing thoughts that I'll try to keep brief, but thank you so much to my fellow panelists. You all have given me so much to think about. One of the things that was said that really was a helpful reminder. Heron, you said the answer to climate change cannot be more systematic oppression. And I think that is so important because I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in real time when I've attended these, seed conferences, and I've had people come up to me and ask, or it's even demand that I sell a sacred seed that's not commercial intentionally. So I've seen it happen real time, and it's absolutely right, and it's a great reminder. The answer to climate change cannot be more systematic oppression, but we do have answers. And I look to my ancestors, both human and plant, for those answers. And Heron and Petra, you reminded us that white people, you also have ancestors from whom you can learn from both the good and the bad. Something else that I had wanted to say, just on the note of achieving seed sovereignty for marginalized communities like African Americans and Indigenous people, is that achieving this will require reparations, rematriations of seed, of land, and of capital. But ultimately, seed sovereignty is not something that can be given. And Luke, you said another thing that resonated with me about Indigenous people that have become reliant on the white colonial government and not acknowledging and trapped into that mindset of dependency. And I think I've also seen that within my own community. And ultimately, seed sovereignty is something that we have to actively reclaim for our own communities. So rematriation is a starting point for Black-led groups, Indigenous-led groups to organize around these ideas of seed sovereignty. And I also really want to emphasize something that's come up for me, is the need for Black and Indigenous solidarity in supporting each other's access to land and to seeds, and supporting our movements towards seed and land sovereignty. And so to the people listening, if this is you, you're Black, you're Indigenous, you're Brown, any combination of, please stay in contact with me because I'm here to help us build community.
Thank you all again. I have nothing to add. can open it up at this point with the few minutes we have left for any questions from the audience. I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat as we've been discussing. We can also just sit quietly with everything that we've heard today.
Well, I see a hand raised from a couple folks.
Okay. I see a hand from Ellen Fine and then Esther Noel. Ellen, would you like to start?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking your time today. And I admire you, Amara, for all your knowledge, so young and so much to give. Thank you. I believe you absorb everything from your ancestry and bring it here today. And just implement it to our lives. Thank you for that. So for my question is, we live in a society, everything is so manufactured. And you sometimes you lost, you don't know what's good anymore and what's bad. We accommodate so much with the bad, we forget our standards as human beings. So how we can really, without seeing the FDA approve organics, how we see organics itself compound to our daily needs as a seed and everything, because so many things say organic, 100% organic, but when you go deeper into research, you saw they add so many things to that organic compound. What we can do as a seed keeper to make sure our seed is not compound to those harsh and slow killing chemicals. Thank you. My question is for all of you guys.
You had a thought here?
Oh, well, I think that our first choice is to look for seeds that are shared and grown by folks that we know and folks in our region, and that we can basically know who has grown it and why and where. So as our circle gets wider, we're less able to know how and when. And we become reliant upon like a third-party certification system, which was what organic is. That's not bad, but again, like with seeds, becoming a seed saver, but also looking to your community around you and broader, starting to develop those networks. There's a sort of a similar question about, is there a regional seed saving network that we can tap into, in a sense that if there was such a network, that could be a place you could look for those seeds. And I would say at the moment, although there is Seed Savers Exchange and another group, is it called Grassroots Seed Network? These are mostly white-led community seed places. There's not really a specific Northeastern or regional seed community network. And I think it is on us to build it in an equitable way that's very representative. But I'm happy to hear other thoughts from my co-panelists.
There's also a question in the chat. I am a farmer. I steward land once stewarded by the Kobog people of the Nipmuc Nation. The land's traditional name is Menemeset. I'm also descended from early white settlers. I want to reach out to offer this land to meet the needs of First Nations here in this area. But I am loath to appear as a lady bountiful. What is the best way to do this with humility and sensitivity?
I think that you're going to have to go out there and meet somebody in person. That's the only way you're going to have to do this. As we've talked about a little bit, is the accountability to each other. So creating a relationship with the community that you're neighboring or that your farm is on with the people who do exist still. would be the best way to go about that. And then you can find through that relationship that you should be approaching with openness, open-mindedness, and open-heartedness to be able to share land. Like, as you say, you don't want to be seen as Lady Bountiful, but that's a tricky thing to get over. And then on that subject, you have to work through your own feelings of guilt and whatnot to come to a place where you can work with Indigenous peoples with a good mind.
I want to answer sort of just this broader question as it relates to people sort of wanting to know, if they're white people wanting to know like how they can support people of color doing this kind of work. Because I think I saw another question in the chat very similar. And I just want to give you guys just a very like sort of general understanding that this all begins with building community. If you are coming, as an outsider to a community, even if you come bearing all these gifts, it doesn't build anything real and sustainable. You absolutely have to go in with humility and ask people first without, assuming what their needs are, what their community's needs are. And you have to engage for a long period of time in order to build friendship, build relationship, build trust, because the trust is not there, and you can't assume that people will trust you because you come with gifts, because we already know from our history that a gift is not always what it seems. And so I just want to say, if you are serious, if you want to help people of color doing this work, I suggest you start getting involved in an honest, open, vulnerable way, becoming part of these communities where help is always needed, and not assuming what you have to offer is valuable, and being generous if something is asked of you. I would also say that if you do come from many intersections of privilege, it might be helpful for you to do a self-inventory of how many of your privileges, which of your privileges exist because they were extracted from others. And once you have that inventory, you will be able to know what you can offer to others. And when it's asked of you, I hope you'll be willing to share. So those are just some thoughts. Always, when you're engaging with communities, don't assume that they don't already have something. It's always best to see what the communities are already doing. Find the leaders who are engaging in this work, and never try to assume to take ownership. Only ever friendship. So that's very broad, but no community is a monolith. Every community is different. So I can't tell you how to approach and engage with a community near you. You have to, as Luke said, go and get out there and meet people.
I can say, as a white male, the best advice I got from a friend of color when I asked that same question was essentially, show up, shut up, and listen. That has proved pretty effective as a starting point. It's all about cultivating authentic relationships.
I would also add that it's important to, when someone is saying the word access, be very clear with yourself about what that means to you. If you're offering something, be very clear in what you're offering, so that you don't change your mind. Like, fulfill your promises. Do what you commit to, whether you show up a little or you show up a lot. If you say you're going to show up, show up. If you say you're going to give, give. If you say you're going to give and then you change your mind because you don't like where it's going, because you are not ready for it, then that relationship is broken. So that's an element of, like, as white people, we got to do our work to say it's not as simple as just offering, but we have to be ready to know what it is that we're offering and know ourselves, and be ready not to, when it gets complicated, revert to saved. We have to be ready to make, it's not an offer, as Amira said, with seed sovereignty or what have you, and is that like true equity is like basically asking, is making the other person is letting the other person set the terms, not setting the terms for the other person. And that's sort of like, I'm willing to give you X is a different thing from the other person saying, I'm looking to do X, and it's sort of a different model of how we sit down. And in white culture, we've had an experience of basically telling other communities what we're willing to give them in compensation or in whatever sharing. That sets the table, in my opinion, for the same kind of level of what is and what isn't equality at that discussion.
Thanks, Aaron.
So I'm going to cut in just really quick, and not to end the session actually, but with the good news that we can continue the session pretty much indefinitely, because I'm going to stay in this room until folks don't want to be in it. But we do have a Spanish lounge session starting right now. So anybody who wants to go to that or has to leave for other reasons, I just want to very quickly read off a few resources for them, and then leave this room open. So please do stick around if you're able and interested in doing so. The evaluation link should be in the chat. Somebody will be dropping that. And please do give us feedback on the session. The vendor marketplace is also there, as well as the auction. And you will be able to find this recordings of sessions. They will be made available to attendees. They'll be gathered and prepared in the next couple of weeks. So do come back and take a look for those. You can also find presenters' contact information in the program book. And if you're on a computer and would like to save the chat with the links, use the ... button in the chat box window. Oh, Jocelyn, I thought I saw you come off mute, but
Sí. Quiero añadir que la sesión de la sala en español es solo para hispanohablantes, los que hablan español como su lengua materna, y no para todo el mundo que quiere aprender español. So just a little clarification on what David said. If you're a Spanish speaker and you speak Spanish as your sort of primary language, you're welcome to the Spanish Lounge. That's sort of who it's intended for, not for folks who want to practice Spanish. Just want to clarify that. Thanks, David.
okay. So that's all I have, but I will leave the room open as long as people want to be here. And thank you so much, everybody, for sharing what you have so far. And I would absolutely not want to stop that now. So please stick around if you're able.
I'll just add a quick note toward the end here for those who are interested in sticking around, that we haven't touched upon seed sovereignty relative to the climate crisis. But I think a lot of that may either be inferred based on the panelists' discussion, or somewhat go without saying, in that living through the sixth extinction and understanding that the climate will continue to change more rapidly just lends all the more urgency to engage in this work in whatever way you can, in whatever way makes sense to you, and with authenticity to yourself and your community. The theme of the NOFA conference is resilient strategies in the time of climate crisis. And I hope you've been able to take in everything that was said by our panelists today and help create that roadmap, because we need a mosaic of efforts, not one singular effort, not one singular group or overarching organization. It takes each one of us. And if there are ever small questions about seed saving, seed keeping, all of our information is published in the NOFA pamphlet. Please feel free to reach out to us. We're all here to talk about these issues because we care. We're deeply, deeply passionate about this coevolution of humans and plants, saving and caring for seeds and feeding one another.
Is it okay if I ask my question now?
Go ahead, Ellen. Yep.
All that you all have said has just been so profound and beautiful. And, I just wrote in the chat that I think that I just wish that every person who ate, which is pretty much most of us, and every person who grew food or harvested could hear it. And so many resonate who already. I think the thing I want to ask and remind us all of is, seeds, it's about reproduction and it's about life. And I just find it so interesting, Heron, that you were raised in a midwifery, tradition. And I'm just wondering if you all could talk about it either as metaphor or exactly how you feel about it. I'm not a long-time grower because so many people around me use pesticides. So I'm actually growing inside this winter. And I'm like so excited watching my seeds just like, start to unfold. And that just birthing new life. And if you think about all that we've gone through with the pandemic and so many other things and so many oppressions, just if y'all can sort of reflect on that and how it gives you maybe personal hope, community hope, or whatever, but just rebirth. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would say just from like a European community culture, folks should look into the tarot card, the Fool, and the Aleph, that is the character for that, which is the symbol for the seed. It is the unformed consciousness or the unformed mind. So that's a really interesting place for folks who are interested in deeply diving into their Gaelic, Germanic, Jewish, European witchcraft origins of some of where seed resonates for us of European descent.
Luke, I'm wondering if I can put you on the spot for a moment here as we're asking about seeds and stories of hope, and have you, as briefly as you'd like, tell the story about the seed sanctuary and the process of rematriation that happened there, because I think a lot of folks aren't familiar with that story, and it is indeed a story of hope.
It's because I forgot to tell about it. Okay, so I work for Radion Hayontos. That means they are seed farmers in Mohawk. And they're a collective of farmers here in Gontege, Tainanega, that put together a seed sanctuary. It's called Gontege Seed Sanctuary. So they formed probably in 2017 or so. There was a seed sanctuary in Kingston, which is not very far away from here. I forget the name of their group now, but it was run essentially by a group of nuns called the Sisters of Providence. And through their own caretaking, they had this seed collection that a couple in Napanee, which is also a town nearby, had been keeping and maintaining for over 40 years. Now, this is I don't know how large it is. It seems large to me, but I'm not really an advanced grower of food and keeper of seeds. What's the name of the Mohawk Seed Sanctuary? Gontege Seed Sanctuary. Just Gontege is the name of this place where I am right now. Radino Hayontos is the collective of people that run it, and I'm their employee. What was I talking about? Right, the Mokes. So they had lovingly struggled to keep the seeds collection going. And the Sisters of Providence and the Kingston group weren't able to carry on doing that, given a whole series of situations. So they, and we, or like, I guess we contacted them. I forget how that works now. But through connection to them, we were able to transfer the seeds to us. And that was supposed to be a five-year transfer and rematriation, which was compressed to 2 years because of the plague. And then they were kicked out of their own building, essentially. So we had to very quickly, in the last 2 years, take on the seed collection and start growing it out. So we had to find land and infrastructure like sheds and that sort of thing, other materials, mulch and whatever, what have you, to make this go. So in 2018, the collection was repatriated to us from the sisters. Now, they're not all indigenous seeds. There are many European varieties, or Eurasian varieties, I should say, more properly pronounced, I think. But there was a ceremony that we held, and our group made a little belt of wampum. I wonder if I have a picture of it that I can throw up on the screen here for you, if that's even allowed. And yeah, we carried out a sort of traditional diplomatic process by which we established a relationship with the nuns and with the Kingston group. They're called Cassie. I forget what the acronym means now, but which we renew yearly. And that's also something important that that we do in the Haudenosaunee culture, is to renew the thing, or to renew a relationship, which means, and in some books you might hear that as to shine the chain, or to polish the chains that go between us. And yeah, so this is the first year that we've been able to have employees, i.e. me, and a gardening intern, as well as the head gardener. We inherited the head gardener from the nuns. She's a white lady who has spent the last 10 or 12 years of her life, I believe, learning this entire collection. So she is the expert right now, and she is currently training our gardening intern, which hopefully, if we find money, we can carry on doing this thing in our jobs and roles, so we can pay someone to learn to take care of the seed collection. And eventually want to have, I think, 5 interns on hand learning this collection. And I'm told also that it takes about 5 years to learn the whole thing. Figuring you're Kingston, there's a Kingston in New York. Huh. Ontario. Yeah, so that's basically that. We are in the process of adding our own indigenous seeds, because Hayantos as a collective has something like 60 different varieties of indigenous seeds just in their own personal collections. And they will be added to the 300 that exist now in the next little while, depending on what our logistical situation is. So broadly speaking, then, Hayantos and the Gandege Seed Sanctuary are about reclaiming our own agricultural heritage, by which, like, I could probably count on both of my hands the amount of farmers there are from my nation in this territory, like on my reserve right here, that do still farm in a sort of either modern commercial or in a traditional way. By and large, the Mohawk people don't farm for their food. But this is something that everybody's become more interested in as we try to pick up our culture again. As it said in my introduction that I was a language learner. Language learning is the hardest thing to do as an Indigenous person in terms of reclaiming your identity and your nationhood. It's the hardest thing to do because everything is in English. Everything around you is in English. Everybody speaks to you in English. You can't go off into the store and say to someone in Mohawk unless they're a Mohawk speaker on your own territory. Like, generally speaking, we don't, like, there are no, there's only, I could count on one hand the amount of new speakers of Mohawk there are of mother tongue speakers in this new generation that have been raised by second language speakers. So that being said, it's a hard slog. Food, because we have to eat every day, because we're always engaged in the process of preparing food and washing those dishes that we prepared our meals lovingly with, it's just always in the front of mind. So that is a slightly easier way of trying to pick up our culture and try to reenact and enact in a daily way our traditions. That's kind of roundabout.
Thanks for sharing. Any of the other panelists want to respond to what gives you hope within seed and seed work? I'm happy to respond quickly, Ellen, to the question. For those of us who have had the joy of watching a plant grow from seed to seed and care for that plant, hope springs eternal from that, because thousands and thousands of years and uncountable amount of hands have done the very same thing to ensure that we're here today. And so, and not just growing a garden, but going deeper with growing a garden or having a farm, and saving seeds and connecting yourself, particularly ancestral seeds, is an act that deepens and broadens your horizon and colors and informs everything that you do. For somebody as a person of European descent and tracing my own ancestral lineage, we have a very deep relationship with the brassica family, with sauerkraut, as Petra had mentioned before, among other things. And so spending some time with this plant and contemplating how many of my relatives ate this plant, how many of them as farmers and gardeners, farmers and fisher people, cared for these plants. Just asking those questions in general and connecting to the process of seed, that despite any conditions, any year, somehow seed continues on, and our evolution with plants allows for both of us to continue to exist, is enough in and of itself to give us hope, even in dark times. And seeds that have been lost for generations and found again, those seeds didn't die, they didn't disappear, they were lying and waiting very patiently for us to take them back up again. That's enough of a rant for me. I don't know if Amira or Petra or Heron would like to contribute to that. Please do. We also have another question in the sidebar that we can try to take on.
I'd love to just share this little sentiment metaphor. I often feel woefully incapable. And I love remembering if I want to eat a watermelon, which is, every day, all the time, that I should, I can plant a seed of a watermelon, and that watermelon is really different from that seed that goes in the ground, but I'm planting that seed nonetheless, with this hope, with this faith, and then it sprouts and is green, and I'm like, it's not a watermelon yet, and I'm like, wait, just wait. Keep cultivating it, keep watering, keep patiently paying attention, and then it's growing and vining all over the place, and there are these lovely little yellow flowers, but it's not a watermelon yet. And so I just love reminding myself that even as I am just wanting to show up perhaps in different ways, I want to jump to the absolute, I want to eat that watermelon, that there's this process that I, in fact, am being tended to, even as I think I am tending. And that if I am that watermelon, I already am that watermelon, right? Whatever you want to be, you already are it, just in whatever iterative moment you are in. So perhaps that might give you a seed's worth, a thimble's worth of hope, as it does me.
On the note of the seeds that have been lost will be found again, I do have a short story that I like to share about this rice that I grew, my first time growing rice. I was growing it at True Love, and we had been given just a small handful of seeds from this community in Trinidad that could trace these seeds of rice to ones that were braided in their ancestors' hair as they migrated to Trinidad from the Sea Islands, and from the Sea Islands all the way back to the continent of Africa. And so this was a really precious and sacred rice that we were stewarding. And in that first season of growing the rice, I sang to the rice every single day, and I prayed with them, and I touched their beautiful braids, and I was so in love with this rice, and I still am. It's still my favorite. And right as we were waiting to harvest them, watching these seeds every single day for when they were perfectly ready to harvest, we came back one morning and all the rice was gone. It had been destroyed, completely taken by rats. And it was this devastating loss of these seeds that I had taken such care of and showered with love and told stories of my family to. And it felt like this great defeat, letting down my ancestors and letting down this community who had stewarded these seeds. And at this moment when it felt like all was lost, days later, when we were cleaning out the high tunnels where we had grown the seeds, Owen found a rat's nest, and it was filled with the rice. It was filled with the rice. And so, of course, we took those seeds back. And it was such a sign from the ancestors of just that those that have been lost, we will find again. And it's the same, that story, that rice has gone through that same thing over and over and over again. It's been lost and found so many times. And then most recently, found again in the nest of a rat. I was so worried those seeds wouldn't germinate, but would you know what they did? The seeds that we planted the following year germinated. And now we've got, from that handful of maybe 10 seeds, we've now got enough for a whole field. And so moments like that, that gave me hope. Someone asked, what songs did you sing to the rice? So for me, a little bit of my background, when I, earlier on in my life, I was a singer in Negro spiritual choir. And so I love Negro spirituals and gospel songs and those songs that were sung in the fields. And so I would sing many of those to the rice. What I sang when I was planting and all of it.
Wow. It's a bumpy transition from there to a question about patenting, but that has come up in that's come up in the chat feature, and I wonder if we want to spend some time on that. It obviously could be another session or entire day in and of itself, but the question is, how are you navigating the increasing and non-transparent seed patenting of open pollinated and heirloom seeds in your work, especially for vulnerable and marginalized communities whose sovereignty, land and seed, does stand in opposition to American government, corporate colonized interests? I'm going to shamelessly volunteer myself to start answering that question, because that has formed the basis of the seed work that we are engaged in on our farm. There's a number of court cases and precedent that has allowed for seeds to be patented. There are a number of things that are plant protections that are not technically patents. And then there are a number of things that are patents down to the most nefarious idea of what you can imagine. Not just varieties being patented, but traits on varieties being patented, meaning those varieties being taken from communities, taken from commons, and appropriated for personal gain and privatized. There are a number of different efforts on this front, regional efforts, national efforts, but we all need to be keenly aware that patenting is increasingly the trend within agriculture and seeds, as within many other multinational disciplines, so to speak. It's all the more reason to do this work, because everything that gets taken out, taken from a people, taken from a community, taken out of a commons for personal gain is one less thing that we as seed keepers, as people who care deeply about seeds, can work with without legal recourse. This is offensive in the deepest degree, and it's only continuing. And we don't see it reflected a lot of times. There are some forward-thinking seed companies who have have listed this. There are some forward-thinking seed companies who are not engaging in them at all. But then there are all sorts of things, just as one example, like bag tags, where something can get handed to a seed company that has a bag tag, an MTA of sorts, just like in the software world, where by opening this bag, you agree to these terms and conditions. And a lot of times that doesn't get passed down to the consumer. So you may well be buying seeds that, unbeknownst to you, already have an agreement that you have no intention of participating in, but here we are. So I can't speak particularly with as a white male to vulnerable and marginalized communities, but it was our sense that we needed to leverage every modicum of privilege we have to engage in being an alternative to this world of patenting. And that means a few things. It means preserving things that are still around and still relevant to our people and our culture. It means keeping things that are in the public domain going, sustaining the dance with seeds that are already out there, that are already good seeds that need a little extra TLC, not from industry to make them better. And it also means, for many of us, how to continue that dance, how to re-diversify our seed supply so that we can continue to eat and honor our past, but also have things that are genetically diverse to continue to tack wind and adapt to a changing climate. So that's all I'll say about that. I'm sure my fellow panelists here have something to say about it as well. Or not. It's a big topic to take on. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. I think, you know, the perspective that many of us who do seed work will share with you, and you'll share with yourself when you grow seeds, is that seeds, the plant itself has never restricted anyone's access to seeds. The plant bears seed and it gives unconditionally. And that is basically its lesson for us. It is us who put conditions upon the sharing of that seed or food. There's never been a plant who's restricted anyone's access based upon the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, whatever. It's always been people who've been restricting people's access to food or seed. So to me, you know, there's some elements of like, we give our power without realizing it if we don't have the skills to hold that power. So learning how to save seed, incorporating that into your garden, farm, your community, is basically a way of gaining those tools. In my opinion, it's the first thing each of us can do. Is people talk about the master's tools, and I often think the master's tools are inversions of the emancipator tool, of the tool of freedom, of the tool of enlightenment. So how do we change that tool to a tool of enlightenment and not the master's tool of slavery? So how do we become seed keepers ourselves? How do we bring seed into our communities? There's so much to be said about patents, and we've done a lot of, there's just, you know, I'd love to have a conversation with folks offline anytime about it. It's just something I've spent a lot of time in my seed career looking into and working with, and a lot of us here on this panel have, and there's so much to be said, and it could really be like a whole day of information. And I think this is also part of this, is like, let's figure out a way that we all become literate about what's going on in the seed universe, what's going on to each other, what's going on with all these things that we can't go into all the details today. But let's try to find a point where we all commit ourselves to becoming literate on what is going on and what is being stolen, taken, and how. And that's kind of like those two tools for me. Is let's take the plunge to learn how to seed save, learn with each other and from each other. Let's learn what's going on. And those two things I think are super key.
Yeah, I wish I had more answers, but to just echo what Heron just said, this past season, I was working with a group of new aspiring seed keepers, and you know, teaching them how to save their own culturally important seeds. And as part of that education, we spent a lot of time also talking about the politics of seed keeping, when seed keeping is illegal. And it was important to me that they not only learn how to actually save seeds, but spend time thinking about how to be in solidarity with other communities that are not allowed for whatever reason to save their own seed because it has been made illegal. And so we spent time thinking about that. And outside of educating ourselves on how we can act in solidarity with these communities who are actively moving against the efforts being made to patent their cultural seeds. I don't have any answers, but that was, how I chose to respond to that this past season.
As to the patent ownership thing, it's hard for me to get around. Like, I'm not sure of the legal situation in the States or the legal situation regarding patents in Canada, but I can tell you that a lot of people have come searching for our seeds, even though we've only had this collection very, very short amount of time. But then also, universities have also come around to each Haudenosaunee community looking for genetics, as Heron has pointed out. Trent in particular has a flint corn project that they sat on and done very little with, and not communicated at all with the people whom they collected seed from. I don't know more on that situation. It's kind of hush-hush a little bit. But at the same time, like, in terms of my own community taking control of its seed and my own communities as Kanyangihauga, we still have some of our own heritage seeds left over from times gone by, and that we continue to grow out. So it's thought of in opposition that we have these things still, so we can continue still doing them. We have this treaty with Canada/US, which we made with the Dutch and the British, and as translated now, it's called the Turo Wampum. And on it is it's white, purple, a line of white again, a line of purple, and a line of white. So there's two purple lines going down the middle of it. And that signifies each of our respective rivers or streams, right? So one side is us, the other side is y'all. And we're supposed to stay in each other, stay in our lanes, basically, stay in our boats and not cross over each other. This has been, violated. So that being said, a lot of the times, Haudenosaunee people don't recognize your ownership of anything. And it is up to you, in fact, to get your house in order, as it were. Like, not to be accusatory or anything like that, but to me, that is your responsibility to fix that situation, to change the legal climate in which seeds can be patented and which traits can be patented. And like, if that takes burning down those CEOs' houses, then get to it.
I think I would also say that there's some stuff in there where there are seeds that are not patented but are stolen, and when it's very easy to just put a number on something. So there's germ banks that large companies own or governments own that they're not rooted in their origin nor the person they were taken from, and have been assigned a breeding number, and that's a way of masking responsibility or accountability. So that's kind of like the hardship of this is we have companies that have freezers the size of Walmart 10 times over full of seeds that are used to breed lots of things. Once and how they are taken, some taken by force, some maybe not. And a friend of mine in the security field told me a story of they were paid to fly in a helicopter raid in the middle of the night to steal rice out of a indigenous peasant field in Southeast Asia. And it's like, that stuff happens, people. That's not a fake thing. So there's a lot of stuff going on with seeds that the patents are the tip of the iceberg of. And they're actually the most transparent version, and there's a lot of non-transparent version. There's some ugly stuff going on out there.
And to add to that, the legal climate in the US is despicable, to say the least, but in some senses, it's nothing compared to what other communities are facing worldwide, where communities are deprived of even growing their own seeds, sharing them with others, bringing them to market, et cetera, because of multinational interests. So Petra had elevated a growing culture as one resource to understand more about that, but I would encourage anyone who's interested in to scratch the surface to see what happens elsewhere around the world when, as broken as the United States is in many, many ways, we're still privileged in a global perspective when it comes to how we are able to access and work with seeds. Esther, I see that your hand has been up for a while, and I don't want you to feel as though we've neglected you. So thank you for your patience. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to.
Thank you. My question was mainly addressing to Amira. Okay. Okay, Amira, as you know, as a Black woman with land in America, I would like to know, because myself, I'm from Haiti, and where I come from now, violence perpetrated everywhere. It's just like people don't look at the land as a asset anymore. It's just like people looking for today food, not everyday food. So I'm moving here into United States, and I don't have a land on my own. I rented land every year, and the thing I encounter, it's a loss sometimes of crops, and I don't know how to get compensated by what I've been losing instead of gain in a yearly basis, because the thing is I don't have my own land. And as we know, those grants, the government always put them for people who own lands. And if you don't own lands, you have nothing. And we make the efforts to try to cultivate and to be more efficient, but it's hard in our pocket all the time to go deeper every year to dig, and we don't really, like last year, I can imagine how much money I lost because of flooding. The land I rented, it's flood. We try again, flood again. So everything is lost completely. And what advice can you give to me right now and to my financial and my self-awareness of being a farmer? Thank you.
Where do you farm?
Excuse me?
Where do you farm?
I farm in Lancaster, Mass.
Okay.
I live in Massachusetts.
Okay. Well, the thing is, I don't know the answer to your question. I do not own land. I lease land. This will be my first time leasing land, actually. And I'm afraid I don't have the answers to your question. Maybe one of the other panelists does. But when it comes to, making farming work financially, I don't have any answers for you, I'm afraid. Can anyone else answer her question? It seems that there's, you're looking in some part for some of the USDA resources. And unfortunately, as you already know, many of those resources are incredibly difficult to access. particularly for people of color, particularly for non-landowners. I don't know, I've never accessed one of those grant programs myself, so I don't have any information for you.
Esther, are you by chance at Mentor Flats?
Yes.
Okay.
What do you say, Winter Flats?
Yes. Yes.
No, we do not. I do not access that.
I wonder whether some of the people involved in the World Farmers Mentor Flats program in Lancaster would have answers of specific USDA.
Yeah, I am in Lancaster Flat. I'm one of the World Farmer members.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think some of
But you stated Winter Flat? Oh,
no Mentor Flats. Yes.
oh, Mentor. Oh, yes, yes. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No
Thank
problem.
you. Yes, Mentor Flats.
Yes, I believe some of the senior folks there should be savvy with what USDA grants are available, particularly grants and low interest loans for communities and individuals of color. If they don't, I believe that the state ag resource, MDAR, should have listings of those on their website. And I unfortunately don't know a lot of those off the top of my head, but I do know that there has circulated around grant funding for individuals, farmers of color, more recently within the last 2 years. So it's out there. It doesn't mean it's easy to access, as Amira said, but I do know there are availabilities that are coming up, especially in the last couple of years. So hopefully someone there is educated on that and can answer that question for you.
Yeah, Esther. I'm familiar. Hi. I'm familiar with some of the state grants, and if you want to share emails with me, then we can continue the conversation a little bit offline. Depending on what you're looking for, there are grants that can go to farmers who don't own land. And we on our farm have taken advantage of some of the grants. And I also had a short period where I worked with MDAR, so I understand a little bit about how the process works. So maybe I can direct you. But I'll put my email in the chat box so you can email me directly and we can continue the conversation. Maybe I can get you something useful. That off the top of my head, I'm
Okay,
not sure exactly what your needs are.
I'm adding my email into the chat as well.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hate to be the one to convene. Are there any other questions? Just being mindful of people's evenings and schedules. I hope that we'll all take these conversations home and continue them in various circles with one another and with our respective communities. I'd just like to give a tremendous thanks again to our panelists for all that they've shared with us today. And thanks to NOFA for having the event and making it possible. And please do reach out to us at any time. Any of us who are engaged in this work, we're always happy to speak more about it and to get others involved with the right livelihood. So thank you to my SEED colleagues and thank you to all of you. Look forward to further conversations. Be
Thank
well
you
all.
so much, Bill, and all presenters. And remember too, if you're looking for contact information, you can find it in the program book. So thanks for the reminder on contacts.
Love to everyone. Stay safe and be well. Take care of one another.